Everyone in the room laughed when the CEO pointed at the janitor's shy teenage daughter and said, "If you can fix this engine, I will give you a scholarship." The engineers expected her to panic, but instead, she calmly rolled up her sleeves and stepped forward. What happened next left every expert speechless. Beneath the grease and wires was a hidden family secret, one that would shake the entire company and reveal a truth no one was ready to face. She wasn't ordinary, she was unstoppable. Before we start, please like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us share more stories like this. Now let's begin. The engine room buzzed with tension inside the headquarters of Stratton Dynamics, a powerful automotive tech company in Detroit. The atmosphere felt less like a board meeting and more like a press event. The air was thick with the smell of oil, ambition, and a touch of arrogance. Engineers in sleek suits whispered among themselves, trying not to laugh. At the center stood a 12-cylinder prototype engine that had baffled the entire research team. It was supposed to be their next big innovation, a multi-million-dollar project set to change the industry. But it had suddenly stopped working. Diagnostics showed nothing. No one could get it to start. Marshall Greystone, the CEO, was a tall man with slick silver hair and a voice that commanded respect. He stood with his arms crossed, looking around the room with clear disappointment. Then his eyes landed on Henry Whitaker, the janitor quietly mopping the floor in the corner. Henry looked down, hoping to avoid attention, but that only seemed to trigger something in Marshall. With a smug smile, the CEO turned to the room and said, "Maybe we should ask Henry's daughter." He pointed to a teenage girl standing near the exit, clutching a worn backpack. Her name was Era. She had come to visit her father after school, her bag stuffed with textbooks, engine diagrams, and a notebook held together with tape. She blinked, unsure if she'd heard right. Marshall chuckled and said, "Go on, kid. If you can fix it, I might just fund your college." Everyone laughed, but Era didn't. She looked at her father. Henry shook his head slightly, trying to warn her. Still, she stepped forward. Her eyes were calm, but her voice shook a little as she asked, "Can I touch it?" "Go ahead," Marshall smirked. "Be my guest." Phones came out. Some engineers began recording, expecting an embarrassing moment to share later over drinks. But something strange happened when Aura stepped closer. Her hands stopped trembling. She dropped her backpack to the floor with a soft thud. Then she pulled out her notebook and flipped to a page filled with complex diagrams and notes. Even some engineers blinked in surprise. "Where did she get that?" one whispered. "That's the same design we developed 6 months ago." Another muttered. She studied the engine for a full minute, then got to work. Her fingers moved like she'd done this 100 times before. She loosened a casing, removed a panel, and checked a tiny overlooked capacitor buried deep inside the control housing. Then she replaced it with a component from her own bag. Someone muttered, "That's not just some janitor's daughter." Another added, eyes narrowing, "She's more than that." Era stepped back and quietly said, "Try it now." The lead technician, still half smirking, pressed the ignition button. The engine roared to life, smooth and flawless. The room went silent. Marshall's face turned pale, but no one noticed. His hands shook again, not from nerves, but from something deeper. The secret Era had buried was rising fast, and there would be no hiding it any longer. Silence filled the room like a wave. The engine's hum echoed through the steel walls. No one dared to speak for a full 10 seconds. Stratton Dynamics' most advanced engine was running perfectly, after weeks of failure. Era stepped back and wiped grease from her fingers with her hoodie sleeve. Her hands still trembled, but not from fear. She had just opened a door she'd tried to keep closed her whole life. CEO Marshall Greystone stared at the engine, jaw clenched so tight his temples pulsed. He didn't look at Aura, but he was trying to understand what just happened. The girl he mocked had solved what his best engineers couldn't, and in under 2 minutes. A slow clap began from the back, from a young technician with tears in his eyes. Then another, but it wasn't celebration. It was awe, confusion, and fear all mixed together. Marshall raised his hand to stop the clapping. Who are you? His voice was cautious now. Era didn't answer immediately. She looked at her father, who stood frozen, mop in hand, eyes wide with fear and pain. Then she met the CEO's gaze. I'm just someone who loves engines, she said. A few engineers stepped forward, eager to question her. One woman, Donna, asked, That design in your notebook, how did you get it? That's confidential. Ara hesitated. Her voice dropped. I drew it. Laughter broke out again, nervous, uneven, almost desperate. You expect us to believe you reverse-engineered a prototype that cost $4 million to develop? Another man asked. I didn't reverse-engineer it, Era said, opening her notebook to another page. I designed it. This one is better. Marshall's face turned red as he snatched the notebook and flipped through pages of equations, electrical schematics, and fluid dynamics models, all annotated in blue ink with dates going back 3 years. You designed this engine when you were 13? He asked quietly. I never said I designed that engine, Era said. I said I designed mine. Yours copied it. A loud gasp rippled through the room. Henry stepped forward, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder. We should go, he whispered. No, Marshall said sharply. You're not leaving. Era looked him in the eye. Are you detaining us? Marshall stepped back, realizing what that meant. His ego clashed with his instincts. Of course not. But we need to talk. Henry's voice trembled. Number you need to listen. Years ago, Henry began, there was a woman who worked here, Osage, a genius. She was my wife, Aura's mother. Her name was Maren Whitaker. Marshall's eyes widened. She designed the first version of this engine long before your team took credit for it, Henry said, and when she found out they were stealing her work, she tried to expose them. The room held its breath. The next week, she disappeared in a lab accident, but I never believed that story. I took the only thing left of her, our daughter, and ran. The hum of the engine continued, but everything else was silent. The walls themselves seemed to hold their breath. Ara stood beside her father, her hands balled into fists. Her voice was steady, and her eyes didn't flinch. But inside a storm raged, a mix of anger, fear, and long-buried sorrow, finally breaking free. Marshall Greystone stared at her as if he had seen a ghost. The name Maren Whitaker hadn't been spoken in nearly 15 years. Not because she was forgotten, but because everyone was told to forget. The official story was sealed, the files classified, the accident written off. Her body was never recovered. But what haunted Marshall more than anything was not just that Maren had worked at Stratton Dynamics. It was that she had been better than everyone else, smarter, faster, more dangerous. Donna, the engineer, stepped closer to Era and whispered, You are her daughter? Era nodded. A voice from the back said quietly, I remember her. She taught one of my first training seminars. She could design propulsion systems in her head like she was playing music. Marshall's grip tightened on the notebook, his voice bitter as he spoke. Why come back now? Why expose this here? Era stepped forward. I never planned to. I didn't even want to be here. You made it a joke. You asked me to fix something your engineers couldn't. So I did. But now that I'm standing here, I won't walk away from the truth again. Henry placed a hand on her shoulder, then gently moved it aside. You see, I used to think silence protected people. Era continued. But silence is what let her die. And if even one person in this room remembers her, wonders what really happened, then I need them to hear it. A senior engineer named Leonard, gray in his beard and guilt in his eyes, slowly raised his hand. I was here when it happened. I saw the files pulled. I saw her research rerouted. I never spoke up. And you weren't the only one, Henry said sharply. I cleaned the labs. I heard the whispers. I saw the locked rooms. The engineers who panicked when her name was mentioned. They buried her, but they didn't bury her mind. They didn't bury her blood. They didn't bury this. He motioned toward Era. Marshall's expression twisted as the walls around him began to crack. Not the physical walls, but the illusion of control he'd spent years building. Do you think this changes anything? He snapped. Do you think a name and a few blueprints make you someone important? Ara smiled, but it wasn't the smile of a child seeking approval. It was the calm smile of someone who knew she had already won. You know what makes someone important, she said. The truth. Right then, everyone in the room knew it. Even him. The silence that followed was different, not stunned or awkward, but the silence of awakening. Suddenly, Donna took off her Stratton badge and dropped it on the floor. Leonard followed. Then another and another. Marshall's eyes darted around, desperate to find control again. This is not your company anymore, Henry said. It never really was. Marshall laughed bitterly, but it sounded hollow. Do you think they will believe you? Do you think any of this will stick? Era opened her phone and held up a video recording. The entire moment from when Marshall mocked her. Audio and video confession, she whispered. It already has. The clip went viral before the sun even rose the next morning. It started as a whisper on a local tech forum. Then it exploded across every platform like a tidal wave, tearing through steel. Era's voice, calm and steady, reached millions. Her face, a perfect storm of pain and power, appeared on screens in homes, cafes, offices, and universities. People replayed the moment she said the truth mattered. They replayed the moment Marshall Greystone was exposed. They replayed the silence that followed, and they listened. By noon, Stratton Dynamics was trending in every state. Not for a new defense contract or rocket launch, but for a cover-up. The world suddenly wanted to know who Maren Whitaker was, and why no one had heard her name until now. A digital army dug through archives, uncovering old patent filings with her initials half-redacted, memos, and suspicious project closures. And standing at the center of it all was no longer just a girl with a violin, no longer just a shadow. She had become the storm. Inside Stratton's headquarters, chaos churned like a machine overheating. Marshall had barricaded himself in his top-floor office, flanked by lawyers and PR advisors. They urged him to issue a statement. They begged him to acknowledge the truth or at least pretend to care. But Marshall refused. Pride was a poison, and he had drunk deeply. In the lobby, employees gathered around monitors. Some watched with disbelief, others with hope, and a few with shame. Leonard stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, clutching his now useless badge. Donna typed furiously on her laptop, uploading internal files to investigative journalists. Every piece of evidence was another crack in the empire. Henry and Ara sat side by side in the old break room. Neither spoke at first. Just the hum of the vending machine and the distant sound of news anchors discussing their lives as if it were a movie. I never thought it would actually come to this, Henry finally said. I didn't think it would either, Era replied. I just wanted to play the violin that day. But you know what I realized standing in that room? Henry looked at her. I was never just my mother's daughter. I was her voice, and someone had to speak for her. He nodded slowly, emotion rising in his throat. Suddenly, a sharp knock echoed down the hallway. It was firm and almost ceremonial. A group of federal agents stepped into the main atrium, wearing navy jackets with gold lettering. They didn't say a word to the staff. They went straight to the elevator. No one tried to stop them. The entire company watched in stunned silence as the elevator doors closed behind them, rising to the executive floor. 20 minutes later, Marshall Greystone was led out in handcuffs. The moment his face appeared on every screen in the building, a spontaneous cheer erupted. Some clapped, others cried, but most simply stood in awe. The man who ruled through silence had been silenced. Outside, cameras flashed as Marshall was placed into a black SUV. Journalists shouted questions. Ara did not speak. She stood on the front steps with Henry, watching the gates close behind the man who thought he owned everything. You should say something, Henry whispered. They're waiting, Ara said, taking a deep breath before stepping forward. My mother gave her life to build something beautiful, she said. Others tried to bury it. But truth cannot stay buried forever. It rises, even if it takes years, even if it takes her daughter. And in that moment, it wasn't about revenge. It was about something far more powerful. Justice. Aura stood outside the Stratton Dynamics building, feeling the weight of everything that had just happened. The sun was bright, casting long shadows across the courtyard where employees and reporters had gathered. Despite the chaos, there was a strange quiet around her, a silence that followed storms, not empty, but full of awe and new beginnings. Inside, a limousine pulled up. Its windows were darker than obsidian, and the crowd instinctively parted. No one knew who was inside, but something about the vehicle demanded respect. The driver stepped out, tall and sharp in a tailored suit. He quickly opened the rear door, and out stepped a woman. She was tall and elegant, wrapped in a sleek emerald coat that shimmered in the light. Her silver hair framed a face that had seen years of grief and strength. Her posture was firm, her eyes sharp, but softening the moment they met Aura's. This was Olivia Whittaker, Marin's mother, Aura's grandmother. "Aura," she said, her voice trembling with years of held-back emotion. For a moment, the world fell away. They had never met before, only connected through letters and distant memories shared by others. But in that instant, blood recognized blood. "I kept everything," Olivia whispered. "Every article, every photograph, every note your mother wrote. I was waiting for this day, even if I never believed it would come." Aura took Olivia's hand and felt decades of pain and hope flow between them like a current. For the first time, Aura wasn't standing alone. She was standing with legacy behind her. A man stepped forward, dressed in a crisp suit. His manner was humble rather than corporate. He introduced himself as Calvin Rohr, acting head of the Department of Scientific Ethics. A new government division formed after the Stratton scandal. He handed Aura a folder. "What is this?" she asked. "Justice," he said. "An opportunity." Inside the folder was a letter signed by several senators. It announced a new initiative called the Whittaker Program, a federal project designed to fund, support, and protect young inventors from marginalized communities. It promised the opening of a national research center, and the top name on the advisory board was Aura Whittaker. Tears filled her eyes, not because of the offer, but because of what it meant. Her mother's work would not be forgotten. It would not rot in the hands of thieves. It would rise. That night, Aura stood on a quiet stage inside a small community center, near the hotel where it all began. Children sat with wide eyes as she lifted her violin. The lights dimmed and silence fell. Then came the first note. Soft, fragile, but growing richer and soaring higher with every second. It was more than music. It was memory. It was truth. It was every step her mother had taken, every injustice, every victory, every tear. When she finished, no one clapped. They simply sat, breathless. Outside, a billboard lit up above the city skyline. It showed a single image, a mother and daughter standing side by side. News had spread. People were inspired. The story was no longer just about a broken engine or a hidden genius. It was about courage, about fighting for what's right, no matter the cost, about how one voice can change everything. At Stratton Dynamics, the old order was crumbling. Marshall Greystone, once untouchable, was now just a man behind locked doors, surrounded by lawyers and PR advisors. They begged him to acknowledge the truth, to make peace, but pride had a grip he wouldn't let go. Meanwhile, employees watched the unfolding story with a mix of shock, hope, and regret. Leonard held his badge quietly. Donna worked late into the night, sharing documents that revealed the depth of the cover-up. Every secret was coming to light. Outside, the world was watching. People across the country talked about Aura's bravery, about how she stood up to power and refused to be silenced. Her story became a symbol, a beacon for anyone who felt overlooked or underestimated. In the days that followed, Aura didn't back down. She met with leaders, lawmakers, and activists. She helped shape the Whittaker Program, making sure it would truly support the next generation of inventors. Her mother's legacy was no longer hidden in the shadows. It was shining bright. And Aura knew this was just the beginning. Days passed, but the impact of Aura's story only grew stronger. She stood at the center of a movement, not just about engines or inventions, but about truth and justice. At Stratton Dynamics, things were changing faster than anyone imagined. Employees who once felt trapped by silence began speaking out. More files were uncovered, revealing years of hidden truths and stolen work. The company's walls, once so solid, now seemed fragile and cracked. Marshall Greystone's name was no longer spoken with fear or respect, but with disbelief and disappointment. The man who had ruled through silence was now facing the consequences of his actions. Outside the company's headquarters, Ara walked with a new sense of purpose. Every step reminded her of the journey she'd been on. From a quiet visitor in her father's janitor uniform to a powerful voice demanding change. One afternoon, a limousine arrived at the company's gates. The driver stepped out, followed by a woman with silver hair, wrapped in an emerald coat. Olivia Whitaker, Ara's grandmother, had come to stand beside her granddaughter at last. They shared stories of the past, of Marin Whitaker's brilliance, of the obstacles she faced, and of the family's fight to bring her legacy to light. Together, they planned the future. The Whitaker program was launched with the support of senators, scientists, and activists. It created a safe space for young inventors, especially those from marginalized communities, to explore their talents without fear. Aura became a leader and a mentor, inspiring others to speak up and pursue their dreams. Her mother's work lived on in every young inventor who found support through the program. In a quiet moment, Aura stood on a small stage at a community center. Children watched with wide eyes as she raised her violin. The notes she played were filled with memory and hope, carrying the story of her mother's struggle and triumph. The music was more than sound. It was a message. That truth will always find a way to rise, no matter how deeply it's buried.